So our mission is internally to accelerate world computing. And what that means is we think of the useful blockchains that we're interested in as world computers. So like one of the big problems in traditional systems, and it's not just the financial system, but also social systems or physical infrastructure networks, is that they're all kind of walled gardens where they have their own things, they have their own data, and then talking between them is cumbersome, but also sometimes not allowed and inefficient. I think like a global world computer basically helps eliminate most of them.
Today's guest is Mert Mumtaz, the CEO of Helius Labs. Helius is a Solana-focused developer platform that provides a full suite of development tools, node infrastructure, APIs, and more. It has raised over $34 million and is trusted by the Solana Foundation, Mad Lads, Tensor, and Zeta Markets, to name a few teams, and some of which we've had on the show. I'm excited to have Mert on today to talk about Helius, Solana, founder life, and what he thinks of the U.S. post-Trump election. Mert, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I didn't actually know we raised that much.
You didn't know you raised that much money?
I didn't. I never actually added all the numbers, but good to know.
Well, I did my research, so it's 34 million. But if any of the millions go missing, thanks for the donation. I appreciate it. To start off, can you tell me a little bit about yourself and how you even got into this space?
Sure. So, the long or medium story, let's say, was I was going to do a theoretical physics PhD in college, and that's when I first started taking some advanced cryptography courses. And at first, and by the way, my roommate, who's now my co-founder, was doing some weird stuff with like Ravencoin or some other weird things.
I've never heard of Ravencoin.
And yeah, he had like some of his friends who became my friends were like some of the early people in MakerDAO and like Nansen and stuff. So we had like a weird circle for a very small school. And but I actually thought it was kind of not that useful. I thought you needed like a PhD to do anything meaningful in the field because I was pretty academic back then. And then I worked at BlackBerry for like a year when BlackBerry was still a thing on the infra team, the cloud team. And then after that, I said, okay, I'm just going to work in industry instead of doing like a weird PhD. And I worked for a bunch of banks and also fintechs. So I've done infrastructure for payments, trading, things like that. And basically, I was just progressively unhappier and unhappier with how the financial system works in technical detail. And basically, I started working at Coinbase about a week before they went public, actually, and did a lot of fun work there. I was on a team that was responsible for basically what Helius does today for Solana, but for what Coinbase does for Coinbase developers. So we built APIs for Coinbase developers for placing trades or getting transaction histories, balances, portfolio charts, stuff like that. And I was kind of a tryhard. And so I read the white paper for basically all protocols at the time. And the big ones at that time were like Polygon and Avalanche. Mm-hmm. And Optimism was kind of coming around, and Solana was kind of this weird one. And then Polkadot was still kind of a thing. And given my background in, let's say, communications and satellite engineering, Solana's white paper actually resonated with me. I thought it was I could actually understand it, like unlike the other ones. And so I started building on kind of all the chains. During my day job, I built for EVM chains at Coinbase, but on my own time, I built for Solana. And at one point, and this was before any block explorers existed or like any analytics sites. So there'd be like NFT influencers who would say a bunch of bullshit like this mint is going super fast, but then like I'd write some code and then they had like the entire supply mint to themselves. And so I'd reply guide them with like basically the data that I put together. And then, yeah, that's pretty much how I got into it. And then basically quit Coinbase to start Helius in summer of 2022.
Yeah. So was the reason that you decided to work on Solana because the white paper was easy? Because I mean, now like a lot of teams flock to Solana because there's a lot of traction, volume, users, etc. It's fast, but back then, each blockchain had to really market itself. But obviously, you saw something in it. What was it?
Yeah, so I have been annoyed by the same problem since I joined crypto, and it hasn't changed. And that's the lack of useful applications. So since really day one, at Coinbase, I was like, why are like people are building such stupid shit with this stuff? Like it's so much more
Like what?
powerful than like just it was always about like some weird DeFi Ponzi strategy. There'd be like Excel sheets on like here's how you farm this, and then you go to this other protocol, and then you take a loop here. And I was like, this is so boring. Like what? Why are you doing this? And I had a realization uh, when we started Helius. At first, it was actually going to be multi-chain. It was going to be both EVM and Solana. But then basically two things. One was that like if you build for multiple different architectures at the same time, you're just not going to build the best product because you're not focused enough at least. But probably the much bigger consideration was basically I was just thinking, okay, so the problem that I'm annoyed by, which actually like fires me up, is there's just no good apps. Um, and okay, why is that the case? Well, there's a bunch of reasons, but the one that I can probably help fix the most, given my skill set, is that it's just too difficult to build scalable, cheap, and performant applications in crypto, especially in 2022. That was not like there was nothing that scaled. Even Solana didn't scale. And then the question is, like, okay, do you build on Ethereum? And at the time, the merge hadn't gone live. 4844 hadn't gone live. L2s weren't really that much of a thing. And so there was all these conditionals that needed to happen for Ethereum to successfully scale. And, you know, basic math is every time you take something with a probability less than 100% and you multiply them together, the probability keeps decreasing, decreasing. Versus Solana, it was something that already worked and scaled, but like it was still broken in many places. But like those are very fixable problems that we could actually make an impact on, right? And so we felt we had more expressiveness and basically influence on the problems we can actually fix and take in our own hands. And so that was kind of the thesis at the time. It's still the thesis. It's pretty much played out exactly like we had hoped. There was obviously some bumps where like, you know, FTX happened and everybody was like, oh, change is dead now. But that was always the thesis, and it's still the thesis. Basically, we don't really care what the name of the database is in the background. We care about where can app developers go to build the best application and actually use crypto.
In your opinion, what is the type of apps that you would like to see built that haven't been built yet? Because obviously there's a ton of them out there. And like you said, maybe not all of them are the best. And I think, you know, for me, looking at the apps out there, there are a lot of like replications and people just doing the same thing with like a slightly different marketing strategy, or it's all extremely financially focused, that Excel sheet style thing that you just mentioned. But like, where do you see actual value coming from?
I think there's two aspects to this. One is just the basics. Like we still don't really use crypto for payments anywhere, at least with any real volume. Actually, I moved to Dubai and I'm able to pay my guys on WhatsApp. They just deliver random
My
stuff in
guys.
Seoul. Yeah. And like, that's just, it's a good experience because it's like, I already have this and I can just pay with it. I don't have to do any of these weird regulatory things. But it's also just really fast. Like I just send it to you and you have in 500 milliseconds. And so just nailing the basics, I think has been an issue. And it seems stables are actually fixing that. I think there's still some ways to go there, but it's definitely on the right track. Yeah, I mean, finance, not Ponzi finance, but like real world finance would be useful. Like being able to invest in different real estate markets and things like that. And I'm also a big like believer in privacy. So we don't really have any good private money systems. Like we have Zcash and Monero, and those are good. I use Zcash, but like it needs to scale. And I think like Zuko is working on that, but I would like to see more already existing for that. You know, digital assets, NFTs, things like that, I think have been treated as sort of like a social club badge, which is fine, but I think there's much more potential there. And so that's just the basics. And then once you go beyond the basics, like, okay, so you have things like prediction markets, which have clearly shown that they're at least somewhat useful, and people are interested in them, as you can see from Polymarket. There's also like some, let's say, non-traditional things like futurarchy, which is prediction market-based governance in a sense, or market-based governance. And SocialFi, right? Being able to like tokenize your time, things like that are pretty interesting to me. I don't think any of them have really worked yet, but I think that's where the fun is, where you have this kind of playground with ideas that kind of work, but like they need iteration. And Deepin is obviously my favorite one, where you have guys like HiveMapper, which are taking on actual monopolies like Google Maps, which is an absolute monopoly. And they're able to actually take on that due to crypto's kind of global payment scale, and just giving everybody a dash cam and then good incentives. And there's a lot of examples of that, like obviously Helium, which I'm also the CEO of, where it's mobile networks.
Helium and Helius are not the same for people who did not get that joke.
So there's a bunch of those as well. And it seems like AI agents are kind of becoming a thing, although I'm pretty skeptical of that one still. But yeah, there's a lot there. And one thing that we've all gotten wrong is people start with the tech in crypto because they have some bags in the tech. And then they start working upwards from the tech. Like, okay, I have this tech. How do I sell it? And they start to like concoct these narratives and try to sell to people. And it should be the opposite, where it's like you talk to users and you're like, okay, what problems are these people having? And does my solution fix this problem? And what kind of solution fixes this problem? Do they need sovereign block space where maybe it's an app chain or an L2? Or do they need like real-time global composability where maybe something like a Solana would work better? So anyway.
In terms of Helius, how would you kind of describe the state of developers today, and like what do they want actually more of? What tools are getting the most use or APIs internally? And how are you kind of building for the future to help developers but also boost up Solana?
It's certainly a layered question depending on like your level of familiarity with Solana, but in general, the obvious case is like Solana's a fast chain, and so people want to be able to use it in a fast way. It's also a cheap chain, so people want to be able to use it affordably. So fast transaction sending and fast, querying your data when you open the wallet, do all your balances load fast. Are they accurate? Things like that. Those are just the basics. And given Solana's scale, where the amount of data on chain is like more than all chains combined currently, that makes the engineering challenges, especially for developers, very annoying. And so like we aim to solve those problems, the fundamentals first. But then there are also like a lot of abstractions that need to be built. Like Solana is fast, but one of the reasons it's fast is because it basically optimizes for machine-to-machine communication, which is in non-human language, which is to say that developers can't understand it. And so you need to build some understandable abstractions on top of that. And so things like when you go to a block explorer, can you actually read what the transaction is doing? That's surprisingly a hard problem on Solana. And so we help with, parsing that data, preparing that data, helping traders optimize their systems so that they have better price discovery. And other like Web2 like abstractions that most developers are familiar with in their everyday, Web2 development, like, notification systems or, good dashboards where you can see what's happening on chain. Tolly basically has this thing where it's like saying where he says, we optimize Solana for being fast. Everything else is left to the reader as an exercise, which is like basically what math professors will tell you when they're too lazy to actually solve the problem. And so that's like, probably people remember when Solana had a bunch of congestion, like 6 months ago, where transactions just wouldn't land.
Right.
And so like we spun up a validator so that we would get more stake in the network. It's now the number one validator, but then we also put fee APIs so that developers can like land transactions fast. And now that's not really a problem anymore.
Okay. I guess, for Solana, it's gotten like an amazing comeback story. I remember when, and not like token price aside, but also token price included, it was at like $8. Everyone was like, oh, this is the end. And now it's like near 200. like 180, whatever. And it's gained a lot of traction, volume, et cetera. I think it's like, what, 4.5 billion in TVL or something. There's just like a lot going on the network. And then we've got Ethereum, which also has been around for a long time. People never thought anyone could compete with Ethereum. And now, in my opinion, Solana's up there punching against it with its weight. Do you see them as competitors or no? Not at all. And then if so, like, do you see a world where Solana does surpass Ethereum and people stop talking about the Ethereum the way that they do as like the first place one or whatever?
So I think people are pretty dishonest about how they frame this.
Was I dishonest?
In general? No, not you.
Okay. I was just saying my opinion.
Let's say.
Okay.
Basically, they'll say something like, the pie is too small. We're not competing. We're collaborating to make crypto bigger for everybody. And it's like, yeah, like, of course, that's correct. We are all trying to push crypto forward. And like, when the SEC was going on for Ethereum and all these things, I was like, fuck off. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Stop trying to mess with crypto. So there's obviously a level of let's say, shared values where you collaborate and you want people to use crypto. So if somebody's options are like, we either use crypto and Ethereum or we don't use crypto, that's like a no-brainer. Like, use crypto. I don't care what the database is called. So there's certainly a lot of, and like, I've invested in a bunch of Ethereum projects in L2s and things like that, Cosmos, whatever. So it doesn't matter to me too much in that regard, but like, they are obviously competing. So like, when Jesse says something like, "Oh, we don't compete with Solana. We're all trying to bring the world on chain and stuff." Yeah, it's like, yeah, correct. But like, I think you can do that better on Solana. And if I want these developers to succeed, I want them to have the best platform. And so I'm going to compete to get those developers. So obviously there's collaboration, but there's also competition. It's, it is business. Business is free markets. There's always some competition. It doesn't have to be zero-sum competition, but there's competition. And so I think that never goes away, and I don't see how it ever would. Even like, you can make an analogy to like nation states where you can have good trade deals with people and like interoperability, and the city context being like good immigration policies and tax treaties. That's all good and fine. But fundamentally, you're trying to become the best country you can be. And sometimes that means competing. So that's the first question. The second one is, does Solana ever become like the chain that people think of, or within the same mind space as Ethereum, let's say? I think in many ways that's already kind of happened. I do think we're still quite behind. One, due to like just lack of maturity. Ethereum has been around for 8-9 years. And the EVM is also much more widely used by developers. And so there's a lot of good documentation, institutional support, all these things. Where Solana is still relatively new. And it, it's been live for basically 3 years, I would say, in real terms. And so there's a lot of work to do to still get more mind share, put out more content, research, institutional adoption, things like that. And yeah, I think, if you look at the history of any kind of software system, like, you have Windows, but then you also have Linux and Apple. You have PlayStation, but then you have Xbox and PC. You have Android, but then you have Apple or iOS. It's kind of always in this dichotomy, or let's say triangle. And Bitcoin is kind of in its own league. I don't think anybody really competes with Bitcoin, personally. But then if you want app developers who want to use smart contracts to build, crypto apps, then I think it's going to be Solana, Ethereum plus L2s. And then I would assume there will be probably one more. Remains to be seen what that one is. Maybe that's like Celestia, or maybe that's another alt one. But I think that's pretty inevitable if you have at least like a 5-10 year time horizon.
So you've invested in Ethereum-based projects, as you mentioned. So do you see the value in a multi-chain world, or do you think it's really going to be like one chain to rule them all in the end, and we all kind of converge into that? I'm a multi-chain fan personally, because I see value across a bunch of different blockchains, and obviously they all have their quirks and pros and cons, but I think, like you said, like the example of like, oh, I could have an iPhone, I could have an Android, or I could have this or that, and they could all coexist, perhaps. And one
Yeah.
might be my
So
favorite, but
yeah, I would say the way I think about this is just, again, working backwards from the use cases. So there are some app types or use cases where you don't need a global state machine that's fast. Like you just don't need that. So for example, if it's like an indie game where you are, I don't know, trading sand or something and building castles and you only put some certain things on chain, you don't need Solana for that. You can use an L2, you can use an app chain, you can use whatever you want. Um, versus something like, real-time price discovery and like global on-chain trading, perhaps that requires a very fast global market like a Solana. And so it's 100% guarantee that the future will be multi-chain, but I don't think it's like a future where, it's just like open borders and people are just going cross chains just for its own sake. It's more like there's these use cases that
it's a
start
purpose.
dominating. So yeah. And then certain solutions fit those problems better than others, right? Like, iPhones, take that for an example. If somebody wants to use iMessage with their friends, they are obviously not going to use an Android, no matter how superior the Android is in
Or a Saga
dimensions
phone.
they don't care about. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of that one. But like, or like with like games, like I don't know, there's like PlayStation specific games. It's like you cannot use an Xbox for that. You have to use PlayStation. And so I think crypto will be similar in that it'll be the use cases that matter. And the open question, of course, is that we don't know what those use cases are. And so we can't really say which chain will be the winner or something. I don't think there's going to be one winner. It's just going to be about which solutions actually solve the problems and then what problems actually exist because we haven't focused enough on those. So like one good example is Bitcoin, which started for payments, right? Satoshi basically wants peer-to-peer cash, but like we've found out that it doesn't really work for cash that well. And so perhaps maybe it's a digital gold and it works well for that. But then it's like, okay, what fills the void of digital cash now? Is it stable coins or is it something like private money with Zcash? And so there's always those kinds of problems that keep rising. And so it's going to be just a question of which architecture actually gives you the best experience for that problem.
Yeah, that would make sense. We are recording this after the U.S. presidential election. Donald Trump was voted again as president, 47th president. He was the 45th. Welcome back, ? You are not based in the U.S., but you like to comment on U.S. politics. And I saw that you tweeted after the election that the Krypton golden age is about to commence. What do you mean by that? And what do you think?
So, well, it's no secret that the existing SEC administration has been super hostile towards crypto. And I think the interesting thing is now kind of like the Republicans kind of seem to have understood that crypto is like not useful to ban, and it actually could be much more powerful if the United States has a lead on it. And now it seems like the Democrats also have been like, okay, like, yeah, this was correct. And so now what I'm excited by is like both sides probably understand that crypto is going to be effective and useful. And it's not like this weird thing that you only use for crime, right? So like that. Anytime you go on TV and you watch any TV show in the US, people will use Bitcoin and then they'll be like, oh yeah, they're asking me for ransom in Bitcoin. It's like, anyway, you can trace that. So that's one. And then two is like, that also had a bunch of things downstream of it. So like obviously SEC was suing a bunch of companies like Coinbase, Kraken, Uniswap, often listing multiple assets as securities, including Solana, which also maybe cast shade on like, okay, does a Sol ETF get approved 2025 or is it going to be like a Bitcoin thing where it just takes years? And then you have like a lot of blockage of like the M&A space, like acquisitions and mergers and things like that seem to take a kind of a backseat. But then with like Stripe acquiring Bridge for 1.1 billion. And then also like Polymarket being literally the number one app that people were talking about this entire election, not even crypto, but just any app in general, kind of stack those together. And you kind of have the beginnings of, I think, pretty useful momentum, where if you can capitalize on that, then it's, I think, the start of kind of a new age in crypto. And so that's what I'm excited by.
You brought up a Sol ETF, and earlier this year, the US obviously got the Bitcoin spot ETF and the Ethereum spot ETF. Do you think there is a need for a Sol spot ETF? Like, is that just to, get institutions into Solana, or is there like a bigger meaning there for you?
I was actually, pretty agnostic on this topic. Like, I was very confused that people care about ETFs because it doesn't, like, I don't care. I will just buy the asset myself. And so I never quite understood it except for Bitcoin. But, after talking to a bunch of institutional folks in the past few years, it does seem to kind of move the needle for them. It does, like just plugging into their existing rails that they're familiar with does make it easier to work with and reason about and all these things. And I think that point of friction is just arbitrary and unnecessary. And so if you can remove that, then that's just one less barrier, I think, to getting slightly more adoption. And then obviously there's, other things like, for example, tax sheltered accounts where you can only interact with things that are ETFs or different kind of vehicles. Most of my knowledge from this actually comes from Canada, so I don't think it maps perfectly to USA. So I'm not super familiar with it, but I'm basically just parroting what I'm hearing from other institutional folks who actually work in this stuff. For me personally, I don't really care. As long as, it's not going to make too much of a difference for me personally, but it does seem like a lot of people care about it. So it's like, I don't see why not. If it increases the SEO rankings for Solana, now that it's being mentioned by a bunch of people, then that's enough for me.
Yeah. You live in Dubai. I don't know if I already mentioned that. You've talked about it before, and you recently moved there, and we talked about it before we even started recording. Good tax haven, right? But also a pretty big crypto hub. Do you see that as like one of the primary ones globally? And if so, like what kind of opportunities do you think are presented there that maybe not exist in other major crypto hubs? Obviously, New York exists, Miami, etc., Singapore, but why Dubai?
Yeah, so I came here during the last token 2049 during the biblical flood, and
the biblical flood, right?
Yeah, that was an interesting time. It's certainly a hub, and a lot of things about Dubai and like the Arab Emirates are based on like superficial understandings of what you see on the internet. But once you actually come here, it's like pretty interesting what the contrast is. I've already met more crypto people here in 3 months than Canada in 4 years. And that's like
it's Canada,
100% serious. Yeah. Well, it's Toronto, which is supposed to be
different.
A business hub, but there's a lot of crypto people here, and I think one of the things that gets under discussed is like the regulators here and even like the royal family are very progressive thinking in terms of technology, and like they're already investigating, okay, how do we establish stable coins and how do we kind of make commerce more efficient? I can already pay with crypto on many of the apps I use in Dubai. And it's one of the interesting aspects of it is like, it's kind of like a Hotel California where like I'm just here and then like randomly, because Dubai International Airport is the most popular airport in the world, actually, by just sheer volume. And it's also in the middle of everything. So like if you're going to Singapore or like Thailand or something, you might drop by. If you're going to Europe, something like that, like coming from Asia. And so people just drop in here, and every week there's new crypto people that I can just kind of get a coffee with or discuss business with. There's a lot of offices. Obviously the tax stuff is very attractive. and there's no tax on like anything crypto. But
Mm-hmm.
also the regulators are like, for example, they made it illegal to like shill tokens, and you have to like disclose all the risks and all these things. So like they're really like interested in how do we promote a healthy crypto ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's like some logistics where, the time zone makes it such that you can work with both, let's say the East Coast of the US, but also Europe and Asia. Um, and there's a lot of funds here. So there's a lot of money that you can kind of leverage to build apps and businesses. So far, it's the most impressive place I've seen for crypto.
Mm-hmm.
I also really like New York.
Hell yeah.
I was a big fan of New York.
That's where I am.
Yeah, it's,
You're like,
it's just,
I don't care, Jackie. But it is good for crypto. Exactly what you're saying is like people do come in and like I get to meet up with a lot of people in person. They're just coming through town, etc. There's a lot of events and so on. But there's definitely a lot of negatives to the crypto space here by a policy standpoint.
yeah, that was one of the things that kept me off of New York. But also like it's just like a Toronto on steroids, and much better in every way. But like I was like, I just want like a really big scene difference here, so I can see what I'm missing on other parts of the world. So, but I
Mm-hmm.
think New York and Dubai are basically the top for crypto in my view.
Mm-hmm. What other countries do you think are getting crypto legislation or policy correct, or at least on the right track?
Well, not Canada. Um,
Okay, not Canada.
um, it seems like Singapore is doing well. I'm not sure exactly on the regulations, but it's similar to Dubai where they're much more pro business and pro new tech. And so it seems like they're doing well. I believe Lisbon is another one that people like quite a bit, Portugal.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like Korea and Japan are also kind of leading the way there as well.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of like good crypto companies actually come from Korea, which I mean, Terra did as well, but like there's still a good scene there. But other than that, I wouldn't say anything great. So like I
Mm-hmm.
think USA will now be on the right track. UAE and Singapore are also great. And then like Portugal and some of the Asian countries like Korea and Japan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Before we wrap things up, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about being a founder in the crypto space and kind of having this like online presence. You're probably one of the more outspoken founders. You joke that you like tweet neurotically, you say what you want. I could resonate with that. I don't tweet as much as you, but I get it. How do you kind of think that plays an impact on Helius's, business? Do you think it helps you? Do you think founders should operate that way too, where they're like constantly putting out their thoughts and sharing things and kind of being like the face and the brand of the business, or it's not necessary for everyone and that's just who you are as a person and it worked for you?
It's certainly not necessary for everyone. And I think a good example is Bridge, where they got acquired by Sprite for $1 billion,
Yeah,
and like
that just
nobody
happened.
knows the founders
Yeah.
on Twitter. Yeah,
Exactly.
it's and I wrote a post about this. It's and this isn't like a crypto specific thing. It's just startup specific. And the way I framed it was like you have to like one of the things that people get wrong is they focus on one side of the picture and ignore the holistic picture. So something like Ethereum is doing poor right now because we have good tech, but our social layer is not doing good marketing. Or
Mm-hmm.
like there's like some of these chains that haven't even launched yet. People are like, oh, these chains are so successful because the founders are online and stuff, but it's like they don't have anything live.
Mm-hmm.
And like those are both wrong exactly 50%. You need to both build and sell. And selling doesn't mean just going on Twitter. It can just mean doing B2B deals and doing everything behind Zoom calls or on LinkedIn even, or cold emails, whatever, in person. But you do need both. You need distribution, selling, and product. And I just tend to have a lot of opinions on random things, so I just post them. But that's just kind of who I've always been. So it's not
Mm-hmm.
like I didn't like start posting just so the business would like succeed. It's just what I already did.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And with crypto, I think like one of the interesting parts is that it's kind of like a city or like a country where like being somewhat nationalistic is useful, right? Like, if you're building, if you're like Anduril and you're building defense systems for the USA, it's probably going to gain trust with people if the founder is also very, much a believer of, USA dominance. And so I think that can play a role with like me and Helius, because I was rooting for the success of Solana, way before Helius existed.
Mm-hmm.
And I started Helius to help the chain scale and help developers use it. It wasn't like, okay, we're building a business on this chain, so I'm going to just pump this chain or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So it needs to be synergistic in kind of like a natural way. Like your incentives have to align, because if they don't, like someday it will come out, and that's you just lost all credibility.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of kind of founders like ask me a bunch of very frequently, probably the most frequent thing I get asked in conferences is like, what's your like process for posting on Twitter, or, how do you recommend doing this?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, it's not something you can like white paper. It's like a creative endeavor
Mm-hmm.
where if you have something to say, then just say it. But if you have nothing to say, then don't say it. You don't just make things up.
Yeah. Don't
I
force
just tend
it.
to, yeah, I just tend to talk a lot and read a lot and, actually be involved in building the ecosystem. And so I can share things that I'm seeing or something.
Mm-hmm.
But like, if that's not your personality or your business, then, it doesn't have to be that way specifically.
Mm-hmm. I also think it's very obvious if it's forced. And like each person, because you are who you are and you have a personality and everything, is different. Like the way you tweet is very different than the way like Jesse Pollock from Base would tweet, or the way that I would tweet. And I am not in the same league as you two, but you know what I mean? Like we all have our own personality and brands. And then like sometimes people will talk in conversations and be like, I really want to embody the personality of X or Y, and it's like, you can't copy what like Barachain or Monad is doing. Like that's exactly why they succeeded, is because they are who they are, or are succeeding. Like you said, they're pre-mainnet. So, but I think that's like a interesting point that like not enough people talk about, is just like be yourself and share your thoughts. And if people like them, it'll kind of be like an avalanche, right?
Yeah. Like the counter is sometimes, especially in highly technical founders, is like, most of them look up to Elon, and Elon has this thing from a while ago where he's like, we never spend money on advertising, like $0 and all this stuff. And so like some technical founders take that and they're like, okay, like if he doesn't spend money on advertising,
We won't
therefore I don't need to
either.
do anything.
Yeah.
I just need to, but like they forget that Elon is the advertisement, right?
Mm-hmm.
People are like, okay, this guy's really smart. He's building all these, cool things. So like what he's building must be interesting. And so we'll check it out. He is the marketing department in a sense. And so you can't, and that's why earlier I said you can't just do half the thing.
Mm-hmm.
You need to both sell and build something useful. And selling can take many different forms, but it needs to be there.
Yeah. Is Helius your first company that you founded?
Yes. I mean, Helius at first was like under a different name, and it was going to be like a multi-chain product. Yeah. Oh, and that's like one of the I like turned 29 recently, and
happy birthday.
Yeah, thanks.
I don't know. Go ahead.
I tweeted like, because I've had startup ideas since really high school, and I actually think they're like really good ideas, by the way, still. And I was kind of like, no, you need to kind of go to school and learn under better people, and then maybe start a company when you're older. And like that's like the biggest regret I have.
Mm-hmm. I did see you actually say this.
I would probably just start a company.
Yeah, you were like, I wish I started 19. It earlier. Yeah. I guess, but like, don't you think the culmination of all the events in your life kind of brought you to where you are? And if maybe you started at an earlier phase, maybe it would have succeeded, maybe it wouldn't have. I guess you won't know, but
Yeah, I mean, it probably wouldn't have succeeded because I did learn a lot from not doing startups, but
Mhm.
um, fundamentally, you don't have that much time. And so I'm confident that we would have been able to learn those lessons while building the company itself. And so I don't know. I would,
Mhm.
I don't really have a point with this other than just kind of go do the thing.
Of course. What has surprised you the most about, running a startup?
I kind of figured that um, the time commitment would kind of reverse. And what I mean by that is I figured like it'll be the busiest by far when you first start the company.
Mhm.
And then as you hire smart people and you set up like all these structures and stuff, then it just kind of gets less and less intense. But it's actually the opposite, which I did not realize. Because
Mhm.
when you first start it, you don't have much at stake. And you can kind of just ship whatever. And then it can just be a shitty product, but if there's a market need, it's fine. And you can iterate from there. But then as the company gets bigger and bigger and the market gets bigger and the product gets more used, you need to put more and more energy to tame the chaos.
Mhm.
And so it actually starts getting worse. And so like uh, I thought it'd be the complete opposite. And like I'm spending more and more time on the company basically every month than I
Mhm.
did the previous month because like things just come up and you need to solve them right away.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree with that. I was talking about that like yesterday with someone else where I mean, my company never fundraised, but we were talking about some recent ones that have raised, over $100 million. And it's like, yeah, it sounds great on paper, but then it's like more money, more problems, more things to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a snowball effect. And it's a good problem to have, but maybe it's still a problem in itself, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for
I would,
Helius, go ahead.
just as a side note, I would advise founders to delay raising as much as possible and then raise as little as possible
Agreed.
because you're just going to put yourself into issues um, where like company equities, employees and stuff starts becoming a problem and expectations, et cetera. So
Hmm. Then why'd you raise?
um, this most recent round, we didn't need the money in terms of like survival. We were already profitable, have a good amount of cash and runway. Um, but it actually goes back to the competition thing where, I was like, you know what, totally like Solana is obviously the fastest right now and it's very good, but that's not going to be the case for ever, right? Like people are going to catch up. L2s kind of have an advantage in that they can just run one node instead of an entire L1. And so like, it's not good enough to be good enough here. And we need to really accelerate, which is why I spam accelerate all the time. Um,
Hmm.
and the money is basically to buy time so that instead of, doing things sequentially over a phase of like 5 years, which like the company will still be around in 10, 15 years, whatever. But how do we do more things faster now and then just keep pushing the boundary and keep competing
Hmm.
as opposed to like waiting for the market to come to you in a sense.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. How do you kind of look at Helius maybe in the near term and long term? Like, what do you really want to accomplish?
So our mission is internally to accelerate world computing. And what that means is we think of the useful blockchains that we're interested in as world computers. So like one of the big problems in traditional systems, and it's not just financial system, but also social systems or physical infrastructure networks, is that they're all kind of walled gardens where they have their own things, they have their own data, and then talking between them is cumbersome, but also sometimes not allowed and inefficient. And like it's also true for like talent and capital markets. So for example, somebody can be born in Bangladesh and I don't know, be even smarter than some kid in New York,
Hmm.
but like they just don't have the same opportunity because there's all this segregation and fragmentation across so many different
Hmm.
system types. And so I think like a global world computer basically helps eliminate most of those, not all of them, but it puts people more on like an even
Even.
footing where, where you can just write code. Nobody knows who you are. They don't have to know who you are. You can just build some sort of, I don't know, decentralized market and get users. And that's it. You're kind of on the even same playing ground as somebody from New York or somebody that's better off.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's like the philosophical basis. And then so it's like, okay, if we believe in that vision, what we need to do is we need to make it a reality. And so we need to accelerate world computing. And so what that means is um, if you have an idea as like a creator in terms of like building things, how do we make it such that that idea can come to life as soon as possible and actually succeed? So what that means is all the tools that you need to build that idea, but also build it fast and build in a scalable and affordable way, right? It's kind of like Jeff Bezos thing where, somebody asked him a question like, what are some of the trends that you're watching that are like changing that Amazon can kind of focus on? And his answer is like, people always ask me this, but it's actually the wrong question. What you want to focus on is like what's not going to change in 10 years, which is that people will always want fast global delivery at cheap prices.
It's true.
And it's kind of the same thing here, where if you can just kind of nail the basics on that and focus on the things like the fundamentals and actually bring it to the world, and specifically app developers in our case, then I think we've succeeded. But like, it's an infinite game. There's always different things to improve. There's always different problems that arise. But that is the mission.
Is it easy enough for non-developers to use Helius's tools and then go launch an app, or is it solely for, people with a coding background?
So with some of these new AI tools like, ChatGPT, it's actually quite easy. I did a few videos on Twitter where I basically just live recorded myself and all I did was talk in English to the app. And I said like use Helius and built like 3 different apps so people can see how to do it. I think like OX Designer on Twitter, he's not like an engineer, he's a designer, obviously by the name. And he also was able to build something using Helius on Solana. It's not really tailored for that, but I think that's not a problem we have to solve because I think AI is doing a very good job of solving that on its own. And so perhaps there's like better integrations with some of those tools. But I think within like 5 years, that won't be much of a barrier for people who don't know how to code.
Cool. Very cool. I got to go check it out then. I'm not a coder, but I'll let you know if I could do it. Last 2 questions, Mert. I asked everyone this. First one, what is something else that you're watching and paying attention to that you think others should as well, that we haven't discussed already?
In crypto or?
It's usually geared towards crypto, but if you want to go beyond that, you can. You're the guest.
I would say watch for hard tech companies. So like space type companies, hardware, silicon based companies that are actually, or like defense, I don't know, hard tech companies, basically. I think those industries have kind of been neglected in favor of like the world of bits, right? Where a lot of people it's easy to write software, so anybody can start a business and do software things. But I think there's a lot of interesting things being built in like the robotic sections, defense, rocket technology, energy, cars, things like that. And oftentimes there is a lot of good parallels as like a founder where you can take lessons from some of those guys. Like I don't read any like crypto books really. I mean, there's not that many anyways. Or like, crypto blogs. I actually like looking at the biographies of like old founders, and like perhaps my favorite examples are like James Dyson, who does vacuums, and like David Ogilvy, who does advertising. And so there's a lot to learn from those types of people who build in much harsher environments. I think like building hardware stuff is much more difficult. And I think with like Elon, especially being kind of, the unofficial CTO of the States at this point, and him being like a pretty big proponent of those types of companies, I think, and with like AI kind of reducing some barriers and knowledge, but also processes, that's a field I would watch. I think it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like it's underrated too. Like there are so many ways, one, that people could get rich, but there's so many industries that are out there for, opportunity. And that's a really good one. I like that. Okay. Can you leave us with a piece of advice, something that you've carried with you throughout your time in this industry?
It's not specifically this industry, but I would just say, I mean, probably the thing I tell myself every day, and actually have it tattooed on me.
Where?
And
like your arm? What does it say?
just finger. Yeah. Basically, I mean, it's just memento mori. It's index finger, by the way.
Okay.
And it means like remember you'll die, and it's actually it has two meanings. One is that like it's like the Stoic saying for like you're gonna die, so just be quick, like you don't have much time. So every time I'm kind of like doing nothing, I'm like, fuck, like I should probably do something right now because I can do nothing later. Um, so that gives you like this inherent sense of urgency, and I think that's very needed, and that's kind of the whole idea of acceleration. But then actually the second meaning of it is it's something that slaves would used to tell the Roman generals when they would go to war and the generals would like whip them and they would kind of like say the words. And basically, their meaning was that like, hey, like dickhead, like we're all going to the same place. Like, stop thinking you're like hot shit. Like, get over yourself.
Yeah.
And so it's also about getting over yourself. And so that's like something that I use as an operating system every day.
I like it. Amazing. Mert, thank you for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.